Hello and welcome to the Phuket Stories podcast. I'm your moderator, Saigon Steve. On this recorded podcast, we'll talk with service alumni who were stationed at Phuket Air Force Base in Vietnam and talk with them about their experiences. Today's podcast is pre-recorded, but you're invited to participate on future podcasts by emailing your contact information to PhuketStories@gmail.com. That's PhuketStories@gmail.com. So let's get started with today's Phuket guest. We're talking today with Bill Troth out of St. Charles, Illinois. Hi, Bill.
How are you?
Okay, great. So you were in Phuket, but before we get to Phuket, tell us about when you enlisted in the Air Force.
I enlisted in the Air Force about a year after I was out of high school, not quite that long. And I was no super scholar in high school, so really kind of waiting for something to happen. A buddy of mine called me real quick and said, let's instead of going to work today, let's go join the Navy. So I thought, okay, what am I else doing? So we went to the Navy, recruiter, and all the recruiters in Elgin, Illinois were in one building. And the Navy guy said, what do you want to be? And I said, I'd like to be a jet engine mechanic. And he said, well, you wear glasses. He said, we don't allow glasses on, we wouldn't be able to wear glasses on the carrier deck. So then he started talking to my buddy who wanted to go in electronics. So I thought, well, that's pretty quick. And I went over to the next door down and walked by the Marines and the Army and went over to the Air Force. And the recruiting sergeant sitting there, and he was, having a good time. It was a light day. And I gave him the same situation. I wanted to be an aircraft mechanic. And he really was kind of, okay, well, he said, come and take our test. He was kind of, dismissal. So I did that, but I did pretty well on the test. So he called me right away, and I came back, and I said, how did it go? And the tests were great. So he said, I told him again, I'd like to be a jet engine mechanic. Well, he said, oh, yeah, that'll probably be possible. No problem. He had real good scores here. So I enlisted. And I waited about, actually, there was a waiting list at that time. So technically, I think I went into reserves about a week later, which meant nothing more than being sworn into reserves. But then you had definitely committed to go into the regular Air Force in it was about another 3 months. So long story is, I went in the Air Force in June, officially June of 68, and head out to Lackland. So that was the beginning. As you kind of mentioned, the next, after the basic training, myself and two other guys were assigned to go to Munitions Maintenance School, which was at Lowry in Denver, outside of Denver. And we were there for about, I think it was 14 weeks in all, before we went and had leave and then went over to Vietnam. So we were really green to go to Vietnam. In other words, we had not had any experience in the Air Force other than basic training in tech school.
So when you left tech school, obviously you were a one-striper, right?
Yes, I did. We had about a month leave, as I recall. It was actually not officially leave. It was arranging for transportation. I guess it was, it was pretty busy there. And I guess it was that long we had to wait to get in the queue. So they counted us with, I think it was 30 days leave, but actually it ended up being more like about 40. They gave us the wherewithal not just to have to sit in transit barracks in Seattle. So we flew out of Seattle, I'm trying to remember the names of the base. I guess it was McCord, yeah. And landed in Cam Bay. I think you had mentioned to me you were with the Air National Guard. Those guys came directly into Phuket, as I recall. But if you weren't in that group, you flew into Cam Bay and then had to find transportation to Phuket because there were no direct flights from the States to Phuket at that time. So that's what we did, went to Cam Bay. This is kind of interesting. They said, well, let's see what we can do. We went up to the station. They hardly knew what Phuket was. And they looked and they said, well, we can't get you into Phuket. We don't go there. There's nothing going there today. We can get you on a plane to Quy Nhon, and from there you can take a bus. I said, oh, okay. So me and the other two guys, we said, fine, what else are we going to do? We're fresh out of tech school. We didn't know the drill. So we did that. We get into Quy Nhon, walk into the little hooch there that was the terminal, and said, hey, where can we catch the bus to Phuket? He said, well, normally you catch it right here, except they blew up the bridge last night, and it's not running. So I said, oh, really? We all said, and what do we do now? He said, well, sit tight. We'll see what we can do. So we sat around for about 3 hours, long story, but finally they came and said, well, they're going to send a bus down from Phuket. They can't cross the bridge, but you can get in that deuce and a half, and they'll take you to the bridge, which is what we did. The bridge actually had, you could see where like 4 or 5 mortar rounds had hit it, but it wasn't like blown out. It was probably just that they had some better things to do with the Army than repair the bridge that day. So sure enough, a truck was on the other side. We walked across the bridge, not stepping in the holes, and got on the bus, and the rest of the trip was pretty uneventful down to Phuket.
So once you arrived at Phuket, what was your first impression when you came across the entrance? What ran through your mind?
Well, it was, first of all, it was sort of primitive, I guess would be the word. I mean, it wasn't the what we had seen as Air Force bases were large, Lowry, and of course Lackland, and so there was no no impression that it was the first impression of everything. Basically, it wasn't like we'd been in the States and had been on a base, as a duty station. We had just been in school, so it was kind of a shock. The next shock, though, really was when we get, the first thing they do is issued us a helmet and a flak vest. And that was kind of a shock. And then, of course, dropped us off at the barracks, and here you go. And the barracks were, well, you were there, I believe, and they were kind of primitive.
Where were your barracks in relationship to give us a reference point to our listeners? My barracks were right across the street from the chapel. Where were your barracks on Phuket?
You were a neighbor. We were across the street and a little bit down from the chapel. Basically, right across, if you went out the front door and you walked across the road, you'd be in the post office.
Okay.
It was right, which was, I'm trying to get this, it would have been, the chapel was south of the post office, if you recall.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we were. We were probably 2 or 3 barracks down from you. I don't know if you were on the same side of the street as the chapel or...
We were across the street from the chapel. Right across the street.
Well, we were across the street from the chapel also, but about maybe 1 or 2 barracks farther north.
Now, did you get the shot of the gamma globulin like we got when we got off the airplane at the terminal? Did you get a shot when you came to Phuket?
No, I didn't, but there's an embarrassing story about that. Not at that point in time, and I didn't know what that was. And I was there, I think, a couple of months, and they told us we had to get it, and we broke and left the bomb dump and drove up to the bus and got off the bus, and they had a separate, when you had it, I don't know, it was like in a trailer, as I recall. The trailer was air conditioned, so we walk out of, real hot into real cold. And while I'm in there, and this is the embarrassing part, I'm standing there waiting for the shot, and there's the medical officer or whoever had a little gong sitting on top of the thing, on the top of a cabinet. So I dropped my pants, as you know how it worked, and I'm watching that thing, and the next thing you know, I hear my buddies laughing, and I'm on the floor. And I didn't, I've had a lot of shots, and I think I had kind of locked my muscles waiting for it. So the bottom line is I passed out getting the gamma globulin shot. And I took a lot of heat for that. I
remember the shot. It was very painful, and you limped out after they gave you the shot. But I didn't pass out.
10 cc's.
Right.
10 cc's is a lot of... It's like getting shot with an insecticide gun or something.
Right, and I think they said it was only good for about 6 weeks to protect you from, hepatitis or something like that.
Yeah.
So you go to...
Vein, because it's making the rounds now. I remember the first thing, too, is I went to the chow hall, you may remember this, and went in line there to sign in, and there was a bowl with yellow tablets, and it was quinine for malaria, and we had to take those every time we got, signed in at the chow line.
Yes, I remember.
That I guess is the same drug that now is getting a lot of press but yes, depending on your opinion, either being or not being a potential for the coronavirus cure.
Right. So when you got to the barracks, to have an assignment, did you have an assignment where you were in open barracks with lockers separating the different people, or did you have your own area?
What they had done is they took the one thing nice about working at a bomb dump, you have a lot of access to wood because all the things came in crates and everything. So at some point they had built lockers, and see if I can describe this correctly. The lockers were the width of the room, and the room was, you had one on each side and an aisle way up the center of the barracks. The back of the locker was the wall of the barracks next to it.
That's right.
In other words, okay, and that's what we had. And somebody at some point along the time, I'll never forget this, measured, and when he actually went to the trouble to write or go to the library or somewhere and find out, he figured out that we were allotted less space than a federal penitentiary cell was required for two people.
Also, I remember that you probably remember this, Bill, that the two most important things that you needed there in that space, that cubicle you would call it, was a fan and a refrigerator, right?
Exactly. A super excellent refrigerator. I'll never forget the words. It was a Sanyo. Of course, that was unknown in the States as a brand. And the front of the one we had there was Sanyo Super Excellent Refrigerator.
And if you were, if you had the time to do it and watch television, you could buy a TV at the BX, and also watch the Armed Forces television channel during those days. Did you have that also?
Yeah, we had. I don't remember we had one in our room. One of the guys down the hall had it, so we gathered in there. TVs were, as I recall, hard to get. That they didn't show up that many times in the BX. A lot of the things, the refrigerator, for instance, somebody had that before I was there, and we just inherited it. So that was not uncommon, I guess, to have a refrigerator. But the TVs, I don't remember. I was in the 18 months I was in about 3 different rooms. I think one time we did have a TV. Somebody had left and they weren't taking it or something like that. But after a while, you watch so many reruns of Bonanza and Hawaii Five-0, and you had them all memorized anyway.
Right. And, of course, you remember going to the outdoor movie theater, right?
I did. And the oddest time of that was the one night when they showed the Green Berets movie. You're sitting there watching this base camp under attack, and you look behind you and you're seeing flares going off.
Yeah. Speaking of that, you were there during February of '69, and there was a sapper attack. Do you recall that the sirens going off and a sapper attack out by your bomb dump?
There were, as I recall, there were 2 sapper attacks. Maybe the earlier one you talked about. They came in, and the other part of an MMS squadron is EOD. They're technically in the MMS squadron. The EOD guys had a hooch right up there at right at the north end of the road, north end of the runway on the road, and somebody had walked out to. We had too much. Had a little beer, and he had to get rid of some. And I guess he spooked them, and they fired a rocket through the EOD building. Now, the timing of that, can't really recollect exactly. But
and the base also
may have been that attack.
Right.
Now, there was another sapper attack, and this one, we just heard a lot of fire at night. Really didn't. I don't even remember a siren or anything going off. We went out to work at the bomb dump in the morning, and we had our own bus that shuttled back and forth from the bomb dump to the barracks area. And we get out there, and the guys that had been coming off shift said, "Hey, you got to go up the road and look at Cobra Flight. They killed some BC." So we walked up a little bit farther up on that road, just past the bomb dump. Up there was the Cobra Flight, the third shift of the security police. And sure enough, they had 4 Viet Cong, what was left of them. Kind of a gruesome sight. I've seen the pictures on eBay. I'm sorry, on the internet. Not eBay. The Facebook, I think, has them on there.
Phuket alumni Facebook.
There's pictures. There's kind of gruesome pictures of the 4 VC that they intercepted. They also had a whole lot of equipment, and the estimate, I believe, was larger. In other words, there were 4 KIA, but they figured the actual contingent was somewhere in the area more like, 10 or 14, 15. There was all packages of RPGs, and the pictures are available if you want to do a search on them on the internet.
Now, Bill, where were you in June of '69 when the base got mortared and they destroyed, I believe, the swimming pool and on and on and on?
Well, I would have been in June of '69. I was there. I don't remember the swimming pool getting hit, but it's possible.
I heard it. I left in June. I left in May of '69, so I missed that. But I heard that the mortars was quite heavy in June of '69, so I got out just in time.
The most ironic, I don't know what word to use, what adjective to plug in. I extended, and when you extended, you got a 30-day leave. That's why, if you count the number of months, it was actually 19 months between the 23rd of January '69 and the 23rd of August '70, is because one of those months I took leave, and one of my biggest regrets, I came home. You could go on anywhere they had an Air Force base, and I could have really enjoyed the 30 days, but I got home and I didn't know anybody. Most of my buddies were in the military. It was in the middle of winter. But I digress. But when I took that leave, I went down to the aerial port, I guess it was, to arrange transportation. And they said, well, you've got 2 options here. He said, there's a caribou that leaves from here and flies to Cameron Bay. It leaves real early in the morning, roughly, I remember, like 5:30, and goes to Cameron Bay. And my plane out of Cameron Bay was like 11 o'clock that morning. Or he said the other option, he said it would cost you a day of leave because your leave starts the day you leave here. And he said you could go into Cameron Bay the previous on a C-130. Well, I had some buddies that had been transferred to Cameron Bay, and I knew some guys from tech school in Cameron Bay. And also I was concerned about missing my airplane back to the world. So I opted for that, leaving the previous afternoon. So I left the afternoon of I guess I get my dates exactly, but it was the last day of January, I guess, or 1st of February. So I don't think anything of it. I get into Cameron Bay. I overnighted there and had a few beers with the guys I knew, and I go down, and the next day fly out 11 o'clock in the morning and fly back to the McCord and do my 30-day leave in the States, and I come back, get back, and repeat. This time I was able to get a flight out of Cameron Bay right to Phuket. Didn't have to go through Quy Nhon. I get there, and I get off, and I walk up to the barracks, or got a ride with anyway, and the guy looks at me and says, "My God, we thought you were dead." And I looked at him, I said, "What are you talking about?" Well, that tragedy, one of the worst things that happened in Phuket, that morning that I would have likely been in the terminal waiting for the caribou to take me to Cameron Bay, was the morning that the rocket attack hit and killed one guy and I think wounded 17 others.
Yes, he was. The story is that he extended one day to play in a basketball game or a baseball game, and if he'd gone out the day that he was scheduled to go, he'd be alive today. But well,
Well, I'm kind of the reverse of that. I could have said, well, I'll cut it close. I'll go down in the morning rather than a day early and save that day of leave, because it cost me a day of leave to leave on. I'm going to miss up the dates here, but I would have likely been in that terminal when that rocket attack hit. I would have been, because I would have been waiting for that flight. Probably the same all those guys that were injured or unfortunately killed were on, because that was probably the flight that was going to go to Cameron Bay, because if they were headed home, that's where they would have flown from.
So, Bill, tell me about...
they were watching out for me.
Yeah, you were at the right place at the right time, which is
Yeah.
wonderful. Now, tell us about your AFSC with munitions and things of that nature. What's that all about? 'Cause most of us didn't come in contact with
No,
actual
the
things
bomb
that
dump
went
is
bang.
yeah. Well, basically, let me start with the bread and butter, which were Mark 82s, 500-pound bombs. A Mark 82 bomb configured as either a snake eye high drag, that's what the fin that opens up to slow the bomb in flight, or just a straight Mark 82. Of all the munitions we sent to the flight line, and anybody in the flight line could probably, if they looked at the armament, that was by far the majority. But anything else that went up there, napalm tanks, rockets, basically it all started in the bomb dump. The munitions typically, for most part, came into Cam Ranh Bay. I'm sorry, they came into Quinyan, because Quinyan is a port. And then they had Koreans, Hanjin drivers. Sometimes if you were on the base, you would have seen these trucks. They were straight trucks, I guess, I don't remember how much would be metrically, but they were fairly large, like a 5-ton truck. And they would have pallets of unassembled bombs on them, and napalm tanks and everything else that we had there. When those guys arrived, we checked them, inspected them as munitions mechanics, and then assembled them. The bombs, for instance, had no fuses, no boosters. A bomb has a booster and a fuse. The fuse is the initial explosion that sets off the booster, and the booster sets off the bomb. The bomb itself is pretty, I don't want to say inert, but it's not sensitive. We'll use that. So that's what we would do. We would put the fins on, the fuse, the lugs that hold them to the plane. Basically, they were all set and ready to be put on the plane, fused, and that was in. So the first year I was there, I worked on those crews that assembled them. The second 6 months after I came back from extension leave, I was line delivery, which meant I drove trucks or trailers or tractors that took the trailerfuls of bombs up and spotted them near the revetment that they were going on the airplane. The big difference in the time I was there, for a lot of things, munitions particularly, when you were there, you were with the Air National Guard squadrons, and they had F-100s, is what you recall.
That's correct.
I think there were 3 squadrons, two Air National Guard, and it was New Jersey and
Iowa and D.C.
Okay. Then there was a 3rd squadron that I think was regular Air Force. I may be wrong on that. I thought there were 3 squadrons. The Misty Facts were there. That may have been the 3rd squadron.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in any event, an F-4 carries a lot more bombs than an F-100. I don't remember exact quantity, but it was when the F-4s got there, a couple of things happened. When I was there, it was the 37th Tactical Fighter Wing, and I was in the 421st MMS. When they made the change, sometime about May, if I recall, we became the 412th MMS. The base became the host. The host of the base was the 412th Tactical Fighter Squadron, Fighter Wing, and there were. I ended up finally, as they brought them all in, we had 3 squadrons F4s, as I recall. And there was a lot more work involved in quantity then.
So were you also dealing with the napalm bombs?
Oh yeah, all the time. It's pretty simple. It's interesting. As a real quick aside, we were in tech school. They showed us how to make napalm. The old way to do it was that you actually mixed the gasoline and the jelly, the additive that made them gel. And there was a machine that did that. And I remember it because I left tech school in November. Was one of the last things we did. And it was cold, and it was nasty to be out there in the 30, 40 degree temperature making this water mixture, and they used vermiculite, that as a substitute for the actual napalm. We get to Vietnam. When I got to Vietnam, the napalm tanks came in already filled. Napalm was real easy for us in the bomb dump. You opened the crate, you lifted them out, put the legs in, lifted them out, and put a cone on and the igniter on each side of them, and that's it. They were, the easiest thing it was to assemble in the bomb dump.
So it's virtually impossible for a bomb to go off while it's in the dump until it's armed and ready to go, right?
I don't think so.
So
There was a bomb dump explosion in Cam Ranh Bay. There was a bomb dump explosion in Saigon. Some of our guys went up to Da Nang, actually. Some of the guys went up to Da Nang. There was a bomb dump explosion while I was there, and they took about a dozen guys out of our MMS to go help clean that up.
Well, do you arm the bomb at the dump and then take it up to the plane, or do you arm it once you get to the flight line?
Well, the way they work is it's almost kind of primitive. Basically, we did not put fuses in, except with one exception, the tail fuse of the high drag bombs. We put those in. Otherwise, the armament guys up on the flight line, the weapons mechanics, they put the fuses in. We delivered the fuses, but they put the fuses in, put the safety wire in it that pulls the pin when they drop from the airplane. So the bombs weren't armed, until they actually were on the plane. In fact, they are actually armed until they pull the pin on them. At the end of the flight line, you may have saw this. There was an area where the planes, the F-4s, F-100s, they turned into munitions or armament guys, and they would go out and pull the pin, and they'd hold the pins with the ribbons on them for the pilot to see that they were all off, and then they would leave and take off. Now, things can happen. This is when the F-100s were still there. We were in the bomb dump one day, and we're assembling bombs. It's all relatively quiet. All of a sudden, there was this huge explosion. I mean, it was big. It almost like you felt it rather than heard it. And what had happened, we found out later. First of all, we thought, what the hell was that? And we went on and looked around the end of the bomb dump, and you could see the smoke just off the end of the runway, north side of the runway, end of the runway. The story was that the weapons guys had put the bombs on the bomb rack, and they hadn't tightened the fairing down. So when the plane got airborne and the wind hit that fairing, it slid back, shorted out the ejection cartridges, and dropped two 500-pound bombs, probably 100 yards off the end of the runway. So, yes, they could explode.
Well, it was very dangerous to be around weaponry like that. They wouldn't let us go near an M16. They kept them in the armory in case of attack, and if you got attacked, we had to go over to the armory and get given an M16 and some ammunition. But we never came near that kind of stuff, except if we were going to be on duty up in one of the towers as an augmentee. But you were around the dangerous stuff every day, right?
They told us in tech school that some of the most dangerous stuff was not designed as a weapon. I'll give you a good example I saw happen. The flares. There were flare dispensers on the planes, and there were canisters that were maybe 30 inches long, about maybe 6-8 inches in diameter, and they dropped the flare. Well, there was a explosive charge in one end, a parachute in the flare. Well, what we did is you put them in the tubes in the unit that went on the plane, the ejection unit. And how you did that was you put one in, and there was a lanyard on the end of it. You put it in with the lanyard out. Then another guy would hold it, the next one, and with a dog ring, you'd put the two cables together and then slide that one in. Getting over technical. What happened when the pilot needed to drop the flares to give illumination for whatever reason, he would hit that, the little charge would shoot them both out, and then the weight of each of these flares, as they're pulled apart, would pull the lanyards, and the parachutes would pop out with an explosive charge. Okay, I hope I explained that well enough. On the pad, two guys were loading those in a as I just explained. One guy puts the flare in, the other guy holds the other flare. He connects the two of them with a hog ring, and slides the second flare in. Well, what happened was he connected the two of them and dropped it. Well, now they're both armed, and they ran like hell, and there was this big boom, boom, and both the flares came flying out of the on the pad down in the. Of course, the fire department came out, and we all got a lecture on safety again. But that was something that was not designed to kill anybody or harm anybody, but here was a situation that was probably the most dangerous thing I ever saw happen.
So, Bill, do you have any other experiences out at the bomb dump you can tell us about? I believe you were telling me before we went on the podcast about coming in contact with a couple of snakes. What's that's all about?
Oh, the bomb dump at night was most of the assembly was done during the day. You still had to do line delivery. I was out there. The line delivery crews ran noon to midnight, midnight to noon. And so I was out there half the night and I was on line delivery. But the bomb dump is not illuminated, obviously. There's no lighting other than we occasionally would have to assemble things into the dark. We use a light all. And we were there one night and there was a trailer full of bombs. And somebody said, I think something just moved under there. So we took a light, I remember a flashlight, whatever the hell we had. Or I think we turned the lights on in the truck and then turned the truck so it was shining under. And as we did that, up pops a cobra head. Well, we decided that was a good time to be leaving, so we backed away and we went to the guard shack. There was a guard. The entry was controlled to the bomb dump. There was a security police there with, and we said, go shoot it. Well, he said, I'm not going in there and shoot it. He said, what the hell? So I guess he called the sergeant of guard, and they went up there and looked for it. I think they had a shotgun with them. Nobody found anything, so we figured he had just slithered back, and there was no reason, fortunately, to get near that trailer the rest of the night. And
but you kind of looked every time you went up in that area to make sure there were no cobras, right?
Well, it gives you, yeah. We had a lot of scorpions in the bomb dump. We see those during the day all the time in the fuse grates. So,
any other experiences while you were at Phuket? And let me tell the people that are listening that we're talking to Bill Troth. He lives in St. Charles, Illinois. He was at Phuket from January 1969 to August 1970 because he extended. So he was there for 18 months. And, we used to count the days. So 18 months is a very long time.
Yeah, but when you're 19, 20 years old, you get into a routine, and it. Looking back on it, it doesn't seem like it was that long. Maybe, of course, at 71 years old, it's a whole different perspective on time.
So when you saw people walking around with short timers ribbons on, it didn't bother you that you had a very long tour there?
No, and the reason, I had gone, as I mentioned initially, we had gone right out of tech school. I had no idea what the Air Force was like, other than it was rather regimented. The word chicken followed by a four-letter word comes to mind.
We used to call it Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, well, that's more polite. And there was tech school was terrible. I rather went through basic twice than tech school once. It was a real regimented squadron, the 40th Squadron. In any event, I was so glad that I thought, I was there. It was interesting. It was never boring, and I didn't know what to expect when I went back to the world. So, actually, as it finally turned out, when I went back, I did not, and one reason I extended, they were using a lot of munitions mechanics in Vietnam, but not anywhere else. So a lot of the guys were being cross-trained. So some of the guys were going back, like I remember one guy that really started me thinking about this, was about 2 or 3 months before I was due to leave, went to Minot as a truck driver. I thought, I'm not going to do that for another, would amount to 2.5, 3 years. So that's one reason that drove me, decided to make the extension and stay there. I'd rather do what I knew than throw myself into a situation where I didn't know what was going to happen. As it turned out, when I finally did go back after 18 months, I was cross-trained to crash rescue, which was pretty nice duty at Luke. So,
were you there during any of the Bob Hope appearances?
Not Bob Hope. We missed that because he was there in '68. I missed that. But in '69, they had a Christmas show. He was not the headliner. And I'm going to forget the lady's name. And she was the young lady that played like the sister on the Carol Burnett show.
Vicki Lawrence.
Vicki Lawrence. Really, you see her on TV later. She was a beautiful woman. I mean, it was, I I would have liked to see Ann Margaret, but she certainly filled the bill as far as being a.
Do you remember going out to the Mars station to call home?
Did it once. Did out there, and I got there at night, and it's funny, and they tried to finally get my name called, put the call through, and the guy comes up there, he says we couldn't make a connection. And that's all he said, words to that effect. I thought nothing of it. All right, so I went back. It was maybe a good week, 10 days later, I get a letter from my mom, and she's all apologetic. She said they tried to put the call through. My sister was home alone, my 3-year younger sister. My mom and dad weren't there, my other sister, so she refused the call. But I guess the Mars guys weren't, they were euphemistic about telling you what happened. They weren't about to say, well, yeah, they picked up, but they didn't want to talk to you. So I didn't even know that. I thought, when they told me that they couldn't connect the call, okay, fine. I didn't think anything more of it. I just thought maybe the radio, connection broke or something. But then I get this letter about 10 days later. My mom's all apologetic that, my sister had refused the call because she was the only one home. So that's the only time I ever tried it.
Well, I remember.
We typically worked, in the bomb dump, we worked 9 on, 1 off. Ooh, somebody's doing something here by the back window. When you had that one day off, it was kind of odd. I mean, it wasn't a whole lot to do, so I didn't feel like a major loss. I spent 5 or 6 hours waiting for the call to walk in there, waiting for the fall to come through, and not have it happen.
Now, Bill, there are 2 things about Phuket that people once in a while talk about. One was when you were going to be stationed there, they called it Base X. They never said the words Phuket, and a lot of people, even today, have no idea that there was a base there called Phuket. Do you have any idea why they called it Base X?
No, but I got I always got a story. We're in tech school. The last day or 2 before the end of tech school, our orders come down. Me and 2 other guys that in there, we get orders to APO 96368, and you know what that is.
Sure.
So the only nice part of tech school is the instructors were pretty good guys, but the barracks guys and the people who ran the squadron level were. So those guys most of them had been to Vietnam. In fact, they probably all had to be in Vietnam to be munitions mechanic instructors. And they said, I don't know, that's not Cameron. I was a Cameron. That's not Cameron's number. And they go through the thing. I don't know, maybe it's the Philippines. I don't know. So they gave us a break. They said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, well, we have a break here. Go over to the post office and look it up. So me and one of the other 2 guys went, hightailing over to the post office. And 96368, that's Phuket, the guy said. And I said, where? Vietnam, he laughs. I said, okay. So we come back, and now the instructors are interested, and they said, what is it? I said, Phuket, Vietnam. And they looked at each other. They didn't know where it was. I think the other thing is, well, you got there early on. That base didn't exist in 1966. I mean, when did the Red Horse guys get there? About 66?
I believe so, and it was just all dirt, and.
So even 2 years later, it was relatively new, and it was a strange situation because, almost all the other Air Force bases that I've ever heard of were they were either tenant bases where it was an Army or Navy installation, and the Air Force had, part of it, like Da Nang or Cam Ranh Bay or Tan Son Nhut. But we were all Air Force. The other thing is there was not a great deal. I put this on and some guys disagree. I know there were, I think it was 173rd Airborne. You'd see soldiers on the base, Army guys, but the bulk of the perimeter, all the perimeter were our own people, the security police, Cobra Flight, and then the rocks. So the area of operations around us wasn't, real well known outside of Phuket. So I think there's a lot of things that I don't know what you can talk about and not talk about, even in this many years later.
Well, there's another issue also I would like to bring up, and I didn't know this until quite recently, that Phuket was a main storage base for Agent Orange. Is that true? Did you hear about that?
Yes. Well, I knew it when I was there, and the line we all heard was, "That's only weed killer, won't hurt you." On the way to the bomb dump, on the road that went out to the bomb dump, there was a low revetment, not a real high one like we had in the bomb dump, and it was would have been on the west side of the road, and it had a cover over it. They had built a wooden thing, like a canopy. That's the wrong term probably. And in there were stacked up all these barrels. And at the time, everybody said, well, that's weed killer. Nobody called it Agent Orange. In fact, the barrels that we saw there most frequently were painted with a big white band, which I have since found, reading about it and everything, that was also a herbicide. I guess the initial stuff sent over there had orange lines on it, and there was some different mixture of herbicide, the same stuff, I guess, in different concentrations. I don't know. But, yeah, that's where it was. And I think you may know better than I would, when they loaded the C-130s, they were C-123s, I think, they sprayed it. I think they just went down to the end of runway and pumped it full of them.
Yeah, well, we were told they were spraying for mosquitoes.
Well, I used to see that all the time. I was actually the bomb dump. At least I remember 2 occasions. There was an old C-123, and they called it Patches, and that was allegedly spraying mosquitoes, and they sprayed it right on us. So if that was Agent Orange, I really got it bad.
Well, Bill,
you look. The one I'll tell you what surprises me. Just recently on the Facebook page, a couple of the guys had gone back to Phuket. I don't know if you remember that. It was maybe 6 months ago, and they had pictures. And they were showing the pictures of driving up that road that goes to the bomb dump, because I guess that is extended now and goes up to other things. And it's like a jungle canopy they're going through. Well, when we rode that road, and I did it a lot for 18 months, there was nothing out there. I mean, it was like, not exactly desert, but maybe a little bit of scrub, something. But there was nothing growing, within 30, 40 feet of that road.
Well, when I was there in 68, 69, that's when they were building the revetments. And they say that today, if you go on Google Earth, you can look at Phuket from the satellite, and there's a lot of houses where we used to be. It's like a housing development. But the revetments, the concrete and steel, they say they will be there long after the pyramids are gone.
Probably. They were put up pretty quick first, because they're about halfway done, I think, when I got there. When did you leave?
I left in May of 69, but I had a buddy of mine that was, we were in the transportation section, and he volunteered to pour the concrete and be out there on the flight line with the revetments. He said he would rather be out there in the heat and be away from everybody else, if you get the drift. And that's what he did. He was in the New Jersey National Guard, Air National Guard. So if a guy named Bud Green ever hears this podcast, get back in touch with us. They
weren't there. I maybe initially 1 or 2, but they weren't there when I got there in January of '69. They were building, but I remember thinking how quickly they went up. I mean, I got if it was Red Horse or whoever did it. It was, you'd be none of a couple of revetments, and the next day you'd come through and they'd be done.
Well, it was basically Red Horse, but they took volunteers. If you were a vehicle operator or somebody like that, and you really didn't want to do that, you volunteered to pour the concrete and make the thing happen, you could do it.
Mm. Yeah, all I remember is that the F-100s didn't have many of them, but by the time the F-4s got there, I think they were all pretty much in revetments. Some of the gunships, the AC-47s and the AC-119, I don't believe they ever ended up. I don't think they were ever in covered revetments. The EC-47s that we had later, those were all in the open top revet. There were like revetments around it, but not a top.
Okay, Bill, I've got just a couple more questions for you. You remember the being at the Chow Hall, and, they call it the Mess Hall in the Air Force, not the Chow Hall. Excuse me. It's called the Mess Hall in the Air Force. And if I remember correctly, that if you weren't the first 3 people to get to the iced tea, it was no longer iced tea. Do you remember that?
I really, for a little first time I was there, I rarely went in the wet mess hall for breakfast, almost never. Well, at that point. We'd come in, typically maybe grab lunch, but that was probably 50-60% of the time. We didn't do it all the time. It was a long trip in, and and we were busy building, and so then in the evening we get back, and sometimes it would be after the chow hall wasn't open or whatever, so we'd go to the Airmen's Club and grab a hamburger or whatever they were had there. When I came back from extension leave and was on line delivery, for that 6 months, here was my diet. As the first run I'd make up to the bomb dump, our shift started at noon. The first run I'd make to the bomb dump to deliver bombs, I'd pull over, and there was a little shack there, I think run by the same people that ran the Airmen's Club. You could buy a sandwich, a hoagie sandwich. So I'd buy that, one of those, and a can of pop, and that was like breakfast. That was the first meal of the day. And then we'd work till midnight. And when we got off midnight, we'd come in. And after midnight, the NCO officers' chow hall was open, mess hall. And, with to anybody, because it was the alert, and they were flying 24 hours a day, so we could go there. And they had a pretty decent breakfast. You get an omelet and some toast and a little better coffee, and it was a nicer situation. So that was my total diet for the last 6 months I was there. A combat hoagie sandwich on the flight line, and then a nice breakfast at probably then about 1 o'clock in the morning.
So Bill, one last question for you. You didn't go on R&R, but you went home for 30 days, right?
No, I went on R&R.
Oh, you did? Where did you go R&R?
Yeah, Taipei. You don't want to know any more about my 3 days in Taipei.
That's what everybody says. They gave me a choice of I could go to Sydney, Australia, or Melbourne or Sydney, I believe, Australia. I could go to Hawaii, or I could go to Penang, Malaysia. And I picked Penang, Malaysia, believe it or not, because I knew I'd never get to Penang ever again.
It seemed our life, and maybe more than others, because we were all the same. You were either a weapons mechanic or a munitions mechanic. I mean, there weren't a lot of, like a mixed squadron where you had guys doing, hydraulics and guys doing all kinds of different AFSCs. So it was a pretty tight group in ammo. And it seemed that it was basically broke down that if you were married, you went to Hawaii. That was pretty standard about most of the guys. If you weren't, the scuttlebutt was, well, here's the place to go, And it seemed to be either Bangkok or Taipei. I went to Taipei. And, so that was like everybody in the squadron. Occasionally some guys would go for other places, but we tended to go where the people that told us this is the place to go, that had come back. So.
Well, is there anything you'd like to add to our conversation that I left out, or is that it?
I'm having trouble remembering her name at 71 years old.
Okay.
The one thing that was a sad point for all of us, we lost a guy in the bomb dump at night. His name's on the wall, and it's terrible I can't remember it. I knew him. He lived down the hall from me, and at night the bomb dump was a little more dangerous because there's no lights. So he got run over by a farm tractor and died, unfortunately. So, it's something you remember, because I knew the guy.
Do you still think about Phuket after all these years? It's been what, since...
Oh, yeah. I grew up there.
Yeah, you were just a kid coming out of tech school, right?
I went over there as a 19-year-old kid, had no idea what I wanted to do, no idea what, it was, I was a street racer and, ran around. I barely got out of high school. Not bragging, but now I have an MBA and an undergraduate degree. I grew up there. If I hadn't, I suppose I would have been somewhere in the Air Force that would have maybe shaped me for the better, but Phuket was it.
Bill Troth, thank you for your service. Well, that wraps up another episode of Phuket Stories. If you'd like to participate in a future Phuket Stories podcast, email your contact information to phuketstories@gmail.com. That's phuketstories@gmail.com. Until next time, thanks for listening to the Phuket Stories podcast. I'm Saigon Steve.